Cannabis, marijuana, weed, ganja, reefer, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of a scary issue for us landlords. And so WTF can we even do as landlords now that it's going to become legal here in Canada, October 17th? What is up, you guys? Matt McKeever here. And so in today's video, we're going to be talking about cannabis, its legalization here in Canada, and how it's going to impact us as landlords and property managers. So, in case you haven't been paying attention, cannabis is going to become legal here in Canada October 17th. And it's got a lot of us concerned as landlords and property managers because there are implications to this. One, the secondhand smoke of cannabis can impact the enjoyment of our rental properties by other tenants. Two, the growing of cannabis, which is also going to become legal on October 17th here in Canada, can have a negative impact on our properties and the potential health and safety of the properties due to a variety of reasons. So why are landlords even caring about the idea of cannabis legalization? I think the majority of it comes down to smoking and the growing of it. The smoking, it really comes down to the secondhand smoke and the impact it's going to have on other tenants. The growing is a much bigger concern, at least in my personal opinion, and that's due to the fact simply that growing cannabis, if someone's going to have hydroponics, if they're going to have grow lights, it's going to create a lot of excess heat in the property. Second, there's going to be water put into these plants, which often creates excess moisture, and so this heat and moisture combination is a perfect fertile breeding ground for mold. Mold can drastically impact both the safety of our property as well as the health of our tenants. And obviously none of us want our tenants to get sick, and none of us want the expensive costs that are associated with the remediation of mold. So that's really the big impact here. But in addition, if you have an all-inclusive rental property and you're paying for your tenants' electricity and they start growing cannabis, that's going to destroy your electricity bills, it's going to destroy your margin, and it could financially really ruin what was otherwise a great investment property. So that's what we need to really be concerned about here as landlords, in my opinion. Oh, and one more thing we need to know about, not only does just like these growing lights potentially add to our electricity bills and add to the mold concerns, but beyond that, it even has the potential to overload our circuits, which could create a fire hazard in a lot of older properties. So, in my opinion, those are the reasons that I see us as landlords being concerned about cannabis and its growing. Let's dive into the articles though. I did a lot of research on this subject, and again, like I mentioned at the top of the video, I did not find a clear-cut, cookie-cutter approach that we can implement as landlords. However, I think there are a lot of tips and tricks that we can implement to try and help protect ourselves, protect our investments, and protect all of our tenants. And if you want to learn more, I'm going to put a link to every article I mentioned in the video description down below. So just click that video description and check it out. Hopefully that'll help you guys on your journey as landlords and property managers. And the first article I want to highlight for you guys is from remonline.com. And it's written by a legal partner from a Toronto legal firm, and he just highlights for us kind of 5 points that we should all be aware of in regards to cannabis's impending legalization coming up October 17th, 2018. Number 1 point, how much cannabis can be grown legally in a residence once it becomes legal? 4 cannabis plants may be grown in each residence. This includes apartment or condominium units. Under federal legislation, this could also include an outside garden that is part of a home. The provinces will each determine whether to permit this outside growing. So that's a big point I want to hit on here. So Quebec, my understanding is, has essentially banned the growing of cannabis at home, where Ontario and other provinces haven't came out with any guidance, so it appears as if it's going forward and will be legal for tenants to grow. But that's something that's really important. So let's say you're renting out a property for individuals. It's not 4 plants times 4. It would be 4 plants for that entire unit, for that entire residence. So that's one point that we should be really aware of as landlords. Number 2, will there be any standards as to what constitutes safe growing of cannabis? So right now, there do not appear to be any regulations in place. You will undoubtedly see toolkits or indoor tents being marketed for this purpose, with marketing claiming that this will prevent mold from forming behind the walls. For example, still, professional electricians will likely be required for this, preparing proper ventilation from the plants to the outside as additional protection against mold. This is a good point. It's actually quite concerning that tenants could set up or jimmy rig their own growing mechanisms in your rental property, and that the province isn't going to roll out any health or safety standards around the home growing of these plants, particularly if it's indoors. To me, it's 2 very different issues, whether a tenant's growing them just outside or tenants growing it in your rental property. Huge difference there. The third question Mark wants to address is, should the seller and real estate agent disclose the past existence of cannabis plants on the property once it's legal? And so in Mark's opinion, this will be an issue as to whether it can be classified as a material latent defect, which would have to be discussed. Since mold behind the walls that the seller knows about could satisfy this test, there will likely be litigation when it is not disclosed and problems arise after closing. Again, there's a kind of a gray area based on my interpretation of Mark's answer here. So it really comes down to, is it a defect in the property, the fact that marijuana was grown there? So if it was a grow house and there's mold, absolutely. However, if someone just grew 3 or 4 plants outside, no, it appears that it would not materially impact the property, its use, or the safety, so it wouldn't be a latent defect. So that's a really big point that we should all be aware of. Number 4, can you stop a tenant from smoking cannabis or growing cannabis plants? Mark's answer is, even though it is legal, you can include a clause in a lease to stop any tenant from smoking or growing cannabis on the premise. This should be inserted into every lease. If the tenant then smokes, it will be easier to evict them. While medical cannabis users may raise human rights issues, it's still better to have this clause in the lease right from the start to have a defense. 100% agree with this. Number 5, what will condominiums do to stop cannabis from being smoked or grown? So some condos already are passing rules to stop any kind of smoking, whether cigarettes or cannabis, and growing of any cannabis plant. Others may set aside an area of the building for users or just for medical cannabis users. Others may just wait and see and attempt to rely on provisions in condominium law that you cannot commit a nuisance to your neighbors. Then if the smoking is bothering your neighbors, they can bring action against you. So that's a really great point as well. So it's going to kind of come down to how each individual condo board's approaching it. So if you're looking at investing in a property, that would be something I as an investor would want to be highly aware of. The next article I want to discuss with you guys, as well as written by a lawyer, it was in the Ottawa Sun, and it's focused on, as the Cannabis Act rolls out, here's what tenants need to know. And so again, it was written by a lawyer at Dickey and Lyman LLP, and essentially it's just discussing again the legalization of weed, and then goes into 3 major points that I think us as landlords or you as a tenant should be aware of. And landlords can and do police and prevent behavior that raises the risk of fire, such as the use of grow lamps which would overload the building's electrical circuits, damages the building, such as elevated levels of humidity, interferes with other tenants, if other tenants complain about the smell of budding cannabis plants. And landlords can and do make tenants limit their smoking. Even now that applies to both tobacco and marijuana. After October 17th, it will continue to apply to both tobacco and marijuana. The article then goes on to note that by Ontario provincial law, smoking is banned in common areas of rental buildings. Generally, in most buildings, a tenant is expected to put up with the occasional exposure to secondhand smoke coming from another apartment, but is not expected to put up with an excessive amount of secondhand smoke. And this is really where the confusion lies, or the gray area lies. What constitutes excessive secondhand smoke? It's really a fuzzy area. And so as a landlord, same with tobacco smoke or marijuana smoke currently, you would have to really want to start building up and documenting a case, and ideally your other tenants will help you do that if it is creating a nuisance on your property and is impacting their lawful enjoyment of their own rental unit. Well, you're probably thinking, okay Matt, you convinced me, I don't want my tenants growing cannabis inside my rental properties. But what can I do about it? And what can you do about it if you don't want them smoking marijuana in your rental units either? Well, I wanted to highlight another article from REM Online I have here, written by Christopher Seep, and he is a landlord himself, as well as the president of the Durham Landlords Association. And this is a great article. Honestly, if you're going to check out only one article that I highlight for you guys, this probably should be the article if you are a landlord or if you are a property manager. And first things first, I just wanted to read this little blurb that Christopher wrote out for us. So, the right to smoke in a rental property is not enshrined in any Canadian legislation, including the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Human Rights Code. In the 1998 case McNeil v. Ontario, a smoker claimed their rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 12, were infringed. The nicotine is addictive and deprivation of cigarettes resulted in physical, mental, and psychological suffering. The court determined that a cigarette ban was not intended to be punishment, but to improve the health of all citizens, and while withdrawal from an addiction to nicotine may be an unpleasant and difficult experience, it is nevertheless temporary. limited and does not require medical attention. Many people voluntarily overcome the addiction. The above case further cited an earlier case, Edwards versus Canada in 1991, the smoking habit is far from a legal or constitutional right to which the state must pander. The only difference we need to be aware of when comparing cannabis to tobacco simply is the fact that cannabis has a proven medicinal use. It's got a proven medicinal benefit, so there may be a bit more of a sticking point here when it comes to the Residential Tenancy Act. But there's another fact that we need to be aware of. If it is negatively impacting anyone else's use of the property, then that probably will be grounds that will support your ban of smoking cannabis in your rental properties. Christopher did such a great job in this article that actually I just want to read this whole section to you, so let's just get into it. It remains for the courts to determine if a tenant's right to smoke marijuana for medicinal purposes is greater than a neighbor's right to not smell it, especially since there are alternative forms of medicinal marijuana, including pills, capsules, and oil. That's a huge point. Secondly, my letter states that if mold develops in their rental unit, we will not remediate it, and we will require a tenant to pay for any such remediation. An N8 notice for eviction could be issued for damages to property caused by an act or inaction by a tenant that is not completely and properly repaired by the tenant. We estimate that growing 4 plants a year will consume an average of $600 to $800, and electrical circuits in older buildings, 87% of Ontario purpose-built rental buildings were constructed before 1979 that are already under heavy loads may increase the risk of fire. My letter states that a tenant may be held accountable for any fire started due to an overloaded circuit. Your letter may say the landlord is not to be held responsible for any increase in electricity costs, although you may find that this is hard to defend in court for existing tenants. Our smoking policy then is smoking, which includes tobacco and marijuana, any electronic versions, and anything smoked for medicinal, recreational, or remedial purposes in growing plants of any type or quantity that requires a room temperature above 22 degrees Celsius or which requires any form of moisture excluding room temperature liquid water directly applied to the plant's soil, which includes marijuana, cannabis, and hydroponics, are not permitted to be grown or cultivated anywhere on the premises, including common areas and the tenant's rented unit. Thank you, Christopher, so much for writing this. I found this to be the most useful article I found on the subject matter, and I 100% agree with everything that both Christopher and the other articles have laid out that we've already discussed. There's no silver bullet. There's no 100% guarantee that you can stop tenants from growing plants or stop them from consuming cannabis on your property. However, it's really important that we build the narrative and build in the defenses. So those defenses, again, are give existing tenants a letter laying out pretty much exactly what Christopher stated. The second is for new tenants, start writing that into your leases. Again, it may be difficult to uphold, but if you do not write into your lease, there's nothing to uphold, so you have nothing to stand upon. So it's really important that we take this seriously, assuming that you do think this is a big deal. That being said, you guys know I talk about on my channel all the time, I myself am a recreational user of marijuana. I enjoy its benefits. I think it does have medicinal benefits for myself and for many other individuals. However, as a landlord, I really sympathize with our perspective on it. So, am I going to be a crazy Nazi at enforcing this? No, that's not my intentions. However, the moment it becomes an issue, particularly the growing of it, I will try and enforce the rules I lay out for my tenants. On the smoking side of things, I'm really going to leave it up to, is it going to negatively impact any of my other tenants? If it is, then I have a duty to those tenants to stand up for them and try and either stop the current tenant from smoking weed or evict them. And that'll probably be the process I'll undertake. So, what are your thoughts on the subject matter? I'd love to hear. Do you think I got anything wrong? Jump in the comment section down below. Share your perspective. Are you a tenant? Are you a landlord? Do you think smoking weed in your rental property should be allowed? Do you think growing weed in your rental property should be allowed? Yeah, I'd just love to hear your guys' opinion on it. I don't think it's black and white. It's complicated. But at the same time, Christopher made a great point there at the end that there are other means to consume cannabis other than smoking it. It's going to be a fascinating subject matter. It's unfortunate that the government hasn't given us greater guidance or given us greater protection as landlords. I would love to see them create some regulation around the indoor growing of cannabis because it's a recipe for disaster. Honestly, there's going to be people trying to cut into circuits. There's going to be people overloading circuits. There's going to be people creating all sorts of mold in properties. It's quite possible that we're going to see a rash of mold throughout a bunch of lower income and slumlord properties. And I guess what I'm saying is I'm probably going to get really good at estimating the cost of removing black mold, because I got a feeling a lot of the opportunities for future burr properties or for future flips is going to come from tenants that destroyed rental properties through improperly growing weed. So at the same time, the legalization of weed will probably create some opportunities for us as investors, but it's also probably going to create a lot of headaches. We are probably going to have to wait until there are some lawsuits to find out whether tenants can grow in the properties and who's going to be held responsible if they do grow and improperly grow cannabis in your rental units. As well, we're probably going to have to wait and see until some cases go before the landlord tenant board, particularly for the medicinal use of cannabis, before we really have clear guidance on how much we can enforce the rules that we want to implement on our tenants, on our rental units. My inner libertarian is live and let live. However, when it comes to a health or safety concern and damaging my property, that's a major impact. As well, another big factor we need to be aware of, if you do inclusive rental units, there is a chance that tenants using and growing marijuana in your property could dramatically impact your utility bills, and in fact could destroy your margins. So I think it's really important that you find ways to write it into your lease to state that they're going to be responsible for any utility usage over a certain threshold or any excessive abuse of electricity, because this could become a nightmare. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion, so jump in the comment section down below, share your perspective as well, share any other resources you have on the subject matter. If you think I got anything wrong, let me know in that comment section down below. I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, if you got value from this video, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something from this video, do me a huge favor, please share it. Let other people know, share it with other landlords you know, and let's all figure this out together, because like I said, it's a complicated subject matter. And if you did enjoy this video, smash that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new to my channel, and until next time, remember, making money is a team sport. There's more than enough money in this world for us to all make it, but if you're not saving it, I mean, like, what's the point, guys? Thanks. Bye!